Well, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is in Israel today, but also traveling is Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas. As you know, many that he is very unhappy with the United States this time for declaring Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital, and because of that, he's basically said that he no longer trusts the United States as a peace broker. So now he is in the European Union trying to drum up sympathy so that the European Union would take over as the peace brokers to the Middle East. But Benjamin Netanyahu has made it clear he will not enter into any type of peace negotiation without the U.S. involved. So it looks like what I was talking about a couple of reports back, that I believe that at some point in time that the European Union would get involved and possibly take over the peace talks in the Middle East, but it looks like it's going to be more of a joint effort. In fact, it looks like, as far as the European Union is concerned, that it's going to be an expanded effort. In fact, that very well may be where the 10 nations come in which the Antichrist will lead. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you a little information on what the article says. It's coming out of the Times of Israel. And the title of the article is EU Ready to Take Center Role in Peace Process alongside the U.S. And here's what the article says. It says European Union Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini is ready to take a central role alongside the United States, expanding the international role in mediating between Israel and the Palestinians, she said on Monday in Brussels. The comments come after the Palestinians have refused the U.S. its role as the main broker in peace talks following U.S. President Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Speaking after a meeting between Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and EU foreign ministers in Brussels, Mogherini said the Palestinian leader agreed to the proposed dynamic. And quoting, it says, "We affirmed our conviction that the framework has to be multilateral. We will continue working within the quartet, which includes the U.S., Russia, and the UN, enlarging this to a few Arab countries and possibly Norway," she told reporters. Well, if we start the count right now, you're looking at the U.S., Russia, and the UN, and possibly Norway. And, that's 4 countries right there, along with a few Arab countries. It looks like that number is heading toward at least 10. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out and see exactly how many actually do come together. But going on with the article, it says the Palestinian president was perfectly fine with this idea of not having the United States as the only negotiator for the peace process, but of having a multilateral framework in which the European Union has a central role, that is, together with others, including our partners in the quartet, including the United States, she added. We will follow up in the coming weeks, she said. But as far as Abbas is concerned, he said the main players in the arena in which he wants to go in the direction is the EU, the UN, Russia, and China. Now, certainly in this list, he has left out the United States, but that's simply not going to happen. Now, Mogherini has said it has long been believed in Europe that peace negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis could only work with the combined forces of the EU and the US, and neither side could succeed alone. There is a space for a common effort, she said, of working with the Americans. This could be done in the coming months if we join forces, she said. And those words you should take very seriously. When she talks about the coming months, she means the coming months. If this becomes a serious effort, we may very well be looking at the beginning stages of what will become the peace process as described in Daniel 9:27. One of the key purposes of Abbas's trip to Brussels was to ask for increased financial aid from the EU in the face of threats by the United States, the largest single donor to the Palestinians, to end its aid to Ramallah. Now, you should also know that once the United States dropped around $100 million in aid to the Palestinians, Brussels and I believe one other nation in the EU stepped up and combined for about $80 million. So they covered much of what the United States had dropped. And speaking of that, it says in response to a question from a reporter over whether Brussels would be willing to increase the financial aid to the Palestinians as U.S. aid to the Palestinians decreases, she said, "We have already increased our support in recent times, and we're looking into ways in which we can do more." She added that the EU expects the United States to fulfill its financial commitments to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. And actually, the countries that picked up some of the tab of that $100 million was Sweden and Belgium. And of course, the State Department denied that the freeze was to punish the Palestinian Authority for cutting ties with U.S. President Donald Trump's administration following his recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, with a spokesman saying it was linked to necessary reform of the UN Relief Fund. Now, here's something I think is very interesting. It says EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini confirmed in her remarks to journalists in Brussels on Monday that EU member states are discussing the idea of raising relations with the Palestinians through an association agreement. There has been a discussion among member states in recent days and weeks on the possibility of launching negotiations for an association agreement, she said, adding that the issue was not discussed with Abbas on Monday. Now, the PA foreign minister, Malki, added that while the Palestinian Authority was very serious about an association agreement, they also expected to be formally recognized as a state, which probably will happen if, in fact, they do get an association agreement. In other words, some type of connection with the EU that gives them a special status but not complete membership. But diplomats and officials in Brussels said Monday that recognition for Palestine is not on the cards. The EU leaves recognition in the hands of individual members. And the best Abbas can hope for is progress toward an association agreement with the bloc. Now, some countries, notably France, are understood to be keen to give Abbas something concrete to take away, but others are more cautious. Spanish Foreign Minister Alfonso Dastis said he was open to starting discussions on a possible agreement, but warned that Abbas must tone down his rhetoric following his outburst against the United States. I think what we must ask him to do is to moderate his response to decisions that we have ourselves criticized, Dastis told reporters as he arrived for the meeting. Now, Abbas's visit to Brussels also comes just 1 week before a committee of key groups who donate to the Palestinians are to convene in the EU capital for an emergency session. The 15-member group called the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee includes the U.S. and the EU. Well, I can tell you this right here. I've been waiting a while now to see exactly how the EU is going to fit into this Middle East negotiation, but we'll see exactly what happens now. I do expect Saudi Arabia and Egypt, if in fact this does go forward as a group peace process for the Middle East, it's still going to be a regional peace process that's going to be with many. But it looks like this particular visit could very well spark the creation of a 10-kingdom nation type of conglomerate that the Antichrist will lead. Now, certainly it has not come together yet, but we can speculate to see exactly where this may lead. Now, the next thing we need to look at is to see how the United States is going to respond to this particular co-sponsorship or even allowing the EU to even lead this process. Now, certainly I believe the United States is still going to play a major part, but it's possible that the European Union will at some point take a lead role with the United States supporting it and also in Israel's corner. Because I can't see that this is going to go forward with the Israelis if in fact this is Mr. Abbas's plan and he's talking about the European Union, Russia, China, and the UN all in his corner without the United States being involved. I have to believe they're going to be there front and center. But the Bible does say ultimately that the European Union would make this peace process come to life. Now, again, as I said, I don't know how that's going to come about, but the Bible has made it clear that that's where this is actually headed. And again, if you're looking at fantastic odds of something like this happening, here we are again. staring in the face of a prophecy that was made 2,500 years ago. And now, in these last days, after Israel's become a nation, after they've regained Jerusalem, after Jerusalem has become a stumbling stone and a cup of trembling to the world, where Russia, Iran, and Turkey are breathing down Israel's neck on Israel's northern border, just as the Bible declared. And also, we're in the middle of a peace process, and not just a peace process, one that is about ready to be led by the European Union or the revived Roman Empire. And that's exactly what the Bible said would take place, as I said, over 2,500 years ago in the book of Daniel. Now, certainly we are still yet to know who the Antichrist will be. And, as the Bible does say, that there will be a great departure that will take place just before the Antichrist is revealed. And certainly I believe that great departure will be the rapture of the church. And once that takes place, then the Antichrist will be revealed. And yes, here's one more thing that I think is also important if you're looking at what's happening in Afrin in the northern parts of Syria. Turkey is now starting not only a ground game against that area, but they're also bombarding the area, and there's a major assault going on right now that is putting Turkey against the Kurds, and not just the Kurds, but it's a U.S.-backed force of Kurds. And guess who's getting blamed because of this war? It's the United States. So I have to believe that this is going to put a wedge between the United States and Turkey. And guess who's blaming the United States openly? Well, it's Russia. So I have to believe that this is going to pull Russia closer to to Turkey and farther away from the United States. And again, this is exactly what the Bible has said would take place in the last days, when Russia, Turkey, and Iran would form a coalition, and that would be when they would come down upon Israel. Now remember, one thing you should know, in Ezekiel 38, in the very beginning pages of that chapter, it states that the leader of that alliance would get a thought in his mind, and that is what will bring down this great army against Israel. And that thought will be to take a spoil. So at some point in time in the near future, this great leader, whoever he is going to get that thought in his mind. And it's going to be that thought that's going to bring these three nations, along with other lesser powers, down upon Israel. And that's when God will miraculously save them. There's one more thing I need to mention about this. All of these prophecies that I mentioned are going to happen in the last generation. So these aren't just random prophecies that I'm throwing at you that could have happened over 100 years. Or even more than that, a couple hundred years. These have all happened in this last generation. So what's the final analysis on what I'm speaking about today? Number one, we need to keep an eye on this major shift away from the United States to more of a global peace process that will be headed up by the European Union. Or at the very least, it will be co-chaired by the U.S. and the European Union. We should also take a look at what's happened in Afrin and see how long this war does take place. And the longer it does take place, the more and deeper the wedge will be between the U.S. and Turkey, and probably will ultimately cause Turkey to leave NATO. And like I said, I look for them to latch on to both Iran and Russia. After all, Russia did have Turkey's back in calling out the U.S. as causing this war to take place. My final word on this is that this is very prophetic and is leading right to where the Lord said it would lead. And that is an ultimate peace accord that will take place, that will kick off the beginning of the tribulation period. And we can look forward to the rapture taking place before. And if you don't know the Lord, today is the day of salvation. Don't put it off. The Bible says that it's appointed unto man once to die, then the judgment. And it's nothing more than telling God that you are a sinner, that you repent of your sins, that you believe that He is the only remedy for your sin nature, that you believe that He died on the cross and paid your penalty, and that from this day forward you are going to walk with Him and you're going to live for Him. And that's really the simple fact of the gospel. And I hope today that you will make that commitment. When you Christians, you need to get a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. Time is short. I have two versions, and you've heard this 1,000 times. There is a digital version that's written in 9 different languages, and it can be downloaded readily free. And there's also a paperback version. Of course, that you have to buy that, but you can literally hand that to your lost loved one, and they'll have that on hand if, in fact, they do end up missing the rapture and going through the tribulation period. You certainly don't want your lost friends and loved ones to be told what to do by the world. So get them a copy, whichever you choose. Go down to the description section in this video, and please get your copy. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.